Hey, everybody. Welcome to our newest webinar series with Catholic Mom. I'm Danielle Bean, and this webinar series is Fresh Start for Fall. Joining us tonight is Lisa Lawmaster Hess. Hey, Lisa, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Danielle. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody.
Hey, yeah, so glad that you're able to do this. I'm really excited for what you're going to share, Lisa. And I'm excited for you all to join us with your comments and your questions too. So if you are joining us live, we would love it if you would just leave us a comment. Let us know who you are, where you're coming from. Maybe share what your organizational challenge is, what fresh start you might be looking for this fall. And as Lisa is sharing here tonight, we're going to give you just a few minutes to join us. It takes a few minutes for people to come on. I'd like to encourage you to just leave your questions in the comments. I'll be keeping track of that, and we'll have a little time for some back and forth, some discussion, some Q&A at the end of Lisa's presentation here tonight. Also, I'm going to put into the comments right now, I think I have the link saved. Let's see if this is the correct link as it shows up here in the comments. It didn't show up. Okay, I'll try that again. Oh, it just took a minute to show up. All right, so you can see there's a link to a Google Drive document that's there in the chat box here on Facebook. And if you click that, you can get a free download. It's a downloadable journal with questions that are on the theme of tonight's talk, which Lisa's going to be sharing with us, Fresh Start for Fall. So if you want to do that, you don't need to download the journal right now. You don't need it for tonight to participate in the webinar here tonight, but you're going to want it in the coming days, perhaps, as you're kind of reflecting and processing the things that Lisa's shared here today, to kind of go a little deeper and dig a little deeper into your life and the kind of fresh start for fall that you want to have in your home, in your work, and in your family this fall. So if you're joining us, please leave us a comment. Please feel free to leave us questions throughout the webinar. I'll be keeping track of those. Let us know where you're coming from. Let us know what your challenges are this fall. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get your feedback on all that Lisa is going to be sharing here with us tonight. All right, well, we're just going to dive in and get started. So I'm going to share with you Lisa's bio. So those of you who don't know Lisa already from Catholic Mom, because she's a contributor there, Lisa Lawmaster Hess is a transplanted Jersey girl who writes both fiction and nonfiction. Lisa's latest book is the award-winning Know Thyself, The Imperfectionist Guide to Sorting Your Stuff. And I'm going to put a link to that in the comments here on Facebook in just a moment. A retired elementary school counselor, Lisa is an adjunct professor of psychology at York College. She blogs at the Porch Swing Chronicles, Organizing by Style, and of course at CatholicMom.com. Welcome, Lisa. I'm really looking forward to what you're going to share tonight.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks for the nice intro. Award winning. That made me sound
Award
really
winning, yes.
important.
We are blessed to have you here today, so I'm really excited.
Thank you. Well, hi, everybody, and thanks for joining, whether you're joining live or whether you're joining later, watching this on video. I am, as Danielle said, Lisa Lawmaster Hess, and the author of, among other things, Know Thyself, The Imperfectionist Guide to Sorting Your Stuff. If you've written a book, you're familiar with the idea that a publisher wants to weigh in on the title. And that's exactly what happened with this book. As a matter of fact, sometimes they change it completely. And that's exactly what happened with this book. I had been blogging under the Organizing by Style umbrella and Style Savvy on CatholicMom.com for so long that it was a bit of an adjustment to go with Know Thyself, The Imperfectionist Guide to Sorting Your Stuff. But over time, I did adjust to it, and eventually I even embraced it. Know Thyself does a great job of describing the personal and organizational styles that are in the book. The personal styles being the who of how we organize. I need to see it. I love stuff, and I love to be busy. And the organizational styles that deal with our default ways of approaching organization, things like cram and jam and drop and run. And I know I put it somewhere, but it's the second half that I want to focus on tonight, the imperfectionist guide. And it's not just to sorting your stuff that I want to focus on tonight, but it's to life as well. The fact that it's the imperfectionist guide references indirectly something I talk about a lot when I am blogging or talking about Know Thyself at all. And that is the idea that I am a work in progress. I don't come to this topic from with background as a professional organizer. As you heard from Danielle, my background is in education. I started this stuff with kids ranging between third grade. So I had about 8-year-olds to about fifth grade, about 11-year-olds. Um, and I still refer to myself as a work in progress. We all want organization to be the thing that is one and done. We finally get there, we hit that perfect spot, everything's perfectly organized, and we don't ever have to think about it or worry about it again. And that's just not how it works. And that's where I want the focus to be tonight. The idea that we are all works in progress, whether we're talking about organization, whether we're talking about life in general. So, what does it mean to be a work in progress? Well, it means that we admit that we're not perfect. I am an author. That's one work that I have in progress. I've got lots of things going on, lots of ideas for things I want to write next. I'm an educator. I have lots of ideas. Every week I run out of time to do all the things I would love to do in my classroom. I'm a wife. We won't even begin to discuss the myriad ways I can improve in that department. And I'm a mom. And as we all know, that's a job that is full of both successes and non successes. And so, if we're works in progress, we're admitting that we're not perfect. We're progressing in all of these areas, but we're not perfect. And we're accepting that. We haven't arrived. Some days, getting out of the starting gate is the best that we can do. So, being a work in progress means we admit at the outset that we're not perfect, we're not finished, we're not complete, and that every single day is a chance to start fresh. And the most beautiful thing about being a work in progress is that every single thing that we do is a chance to start fresh. If we're gearing up for progress, not perfection, then every step we take is a step in the right direction for that day. And if we find that we're on the wrong path, the right path might just be a step to the left or a step to the right. Progress means we're not always going to get to the finish line, but we work on getting out of the starting gate, and sometimes that's enough. If you're familiar with the book, you have heard about my personal styles and my organizational styles, which I just talked about briefly. Personal styles being the who, I need to see it, I love stuff, and I love to be busy. And the organizational styles being how we organize, drop and run, cram and jam. I know I put it somewhere. But if you're even being familiar with those two things, you know there are 3 sets of styles in the book. Those are 2, the personal styles and the organizational styles. And then the third one is style the process, which I talk about in the book as a way to kind of get us from start to finish ish, because we're still progressing, um, with organization. And I want to talk about that tonight, both from the perspective of organization and from the perspective of life in general and self care. Life in general and self care, like organizing, is never something that's totally finished the way we want it to be. And so I want to kind of walk through those style steps and think about how can we apply them to organizing, which is familiar if you've heard me speak before or if you've read my book. Um, and how do we apply it to ourselves in this really difficult, challenging time of a pandemic? Our lives have been turned upside down. Life as we know it has become very different from what we are used to or what we expected. And for some of us here tonight, organizing may be the very last thing on our minds, which is the reason I opted not to zoom in on that and live there tonight. So I'm hoping that everybody can leave with a little bit of a takeaway, whether it's the organizing stuff you're used to hearing me talk about, or whether it's something that goes a little more deeper and perhaps a little more personal, applies a little more personally for you if you're listening tonight. So that third style, the process, is start with successes, that's S. Take small steps, that's T. Yes, it has a home, that's Y. Let it go, that's L. And then easy upkeep is E. We're going to go through these a little bit just as they pertain to organization and to taking care of ourselves in this extremely challenging time. So, first of all, with S in style, start with successes from an organization perspective. What this means is that instead of looking around like we typically do when we want to get organized and looking at every single thing that's wrong, and I could list you chapter and verse just from the seat where I am right now in my office of things that need to be improved, we flip that. And instead, we look at what's working. What are the things that we are doing well? What tools do we have in place that keep us organized in one place? Because the idea is to recognize what works and then be able to kind of explode that forward into other areas of our lives, recognize and replicate. So as I look around my office, some of the things that work are my file bins that I've talked about before that have no tops on them. As an I need to see it girl, somebody with an I need to see it personal style, when I put things in the file cabinet, they're lost, they're gone. File cabinets are great for archival storage, but for day-to-day storage, if I put it away, I forget about it. Maybe that's age, but I think that's actually been true before I could claim age as the reason for it. So I look at those and I think, okay, here's a concept, an organizational concept that's working for me in one area of my life. How do I move that forward and use that concept in other organizational areas as well? How do we apply this? This is harder when it comes to self talk and our self care. We can't look around and see it the same way that we can with organizational kinds of things, but we can feel it. And we can feel when things are working and we can feel when things are not. And the second step, take small steps, that I'm going to talk about in a minute, ties really intimately in with this one. So I'm going to talk about them a little bit together. Um, it might be something as simple as tonight I actually got dinner on the table and everyone got to be around the table at the same time. That's a pretty big thing, actually. That's not a small thing. That's a pretty big accomplishment if you've managed to do that in the midst of all of the hecticness of a regular old day. Something maybe slightly smaller might be I read my children a bedtime story. I got to snuggle up with them at that point in the evening. That's a success. And that's something that we look at and say, wow, I felt really good when I did this. And it's something I want to do again because it made me feel really good. I took 10 minutes for myself today in the middle of a very busy day, and I felt guilty at first, but by the end of the 10 minutes, I felt a little bit refreshed. And boy, was that good. And I want to do that again. So recognizing those successes. For me, an example right now, my 22-year-old daughter is home after having graduated from college, and she's trying to do the job search in this lovely, wonderful atmosphere that we're all living in. And she's home, which isn't something I expected. My husband and I had adjusted to being empty nesters, and having her back again is wonderful, but it's a challenge, and it's different for her to be here, and it's different for us to have her here as an adult. I wouldn't trade it, but one of the successes that we have is even though we may be running past each other and doing our own things all day long, she comes down every evening between about 10 and 10:30 because my husband's an early bird and he's out for the night by then, and the two of us sit together and watch something on television together from 10 till usually 11:30 or midnight. I'm a night owl and she's a bit of one as well. I'm going to miss that when she's not here. So I am soaking that up every single night. That's a small mother-daughter success that's not difficult, not complicated, but something that I look forward to every night. T, take small steps. I've already alluded to that a little bit with the self care, and we'll come back to that with that as well. Taking small steps in organization means finding those small little nuggets of time and putting them to use if we can, or taking our big, enormous goals that we want to get done. I'm going to reorganize the entire garage because, hey, it's a pandemic and we're not going anywhere anyway. How many of you had that kind of a goal and you're not making any progress at all? Yeah, welcome to the work in progress club. Me neither. We don't have a garage, but for me, it's all of the writing goals that I thought I would get done with all of this time on my hands. So it's breaking things down into small bits, taking that big task and spending a little bit of time on it so that you slowly see progress, the theme for the evening. Maybe you've got 10 minutes while the pasta is boiling that you can take a look at that mail pile on the counter and take 10 minutes and sort through it and separate out the catalogs and the junk mail from the bills and the things you want to keep. You can spend 10 minutes or even 5 if that's all you've got. You've got 5 minutes before you've got to leave the house to be someplace. Can you take that little snippet of time? So often we look at it and go, oh, I don't have enough time to do anything with this. But a succession of small steps can bring us to the goal that we want. This is true with life and self-care as well. If we can give ourselves 5, 15 would be better. An hour and a half would be even better. But if we can give ourselves 5, take some time for ourselves to do something, or take those personal goals and break them down into smaller bits. It can help us to feel more successful, and it can help us to recoup and to take care of ourselves. which is a really important thing to do and something that moms are not always the greatest at doing. We have a tendency to run through our lists and take care of everybody else. The older I get, the better I am at being a little bit selfish and figuring out what it is that I need for me, because it makes me a lot more fun to live with, especially when we're all living in close quarters. For why, yes, it has a home. When we're talking about that with organization, we're talking about finding the right location for each thing, finding homes for all the things that are things that we use on a daily basis. I was going to say things that are sitting around because we all have them in our houses, and usually the things that are sitting around are the things that do not have a home. But yes, it has a home means finding a logical, consistent home for all of our things. If it's worth keeping, it's worth having a home for. And that also means that organization's a lot easier, because when you've got stuff laying around, like as I look at my office counter right now, if things that get set down in the wrong spot have a home, picking them up and putting them away is almost a no-brainer. And so it makes organization easier. So finding homes for everything is really important to staying organized, because if we don't know where things go, we can't put them away. And if we can't put things away, then we're living constantly in clutter, which takes a toll on us. It's exhausting to live constantly among piles and clutter. How do homes connect to the concept of self-care and life in general? We need to find a home for that time that we're dedicating to self-care. That's usually our stumbling block. We promise every morning that we're going to find that time to sit down and read some scripture, or we're going to find that time to write in a journal, or read that book that is due at the library in a week, and we've got to get through it if we want to not have to renew it again. It's making a home for that self-care, whether it is making an appointment with yourself by writing it into your planner at the start of the day, or maybe being a little bit sneaky about it. During this pandemic, many of us are teaching from home, and many of you were teaching from home long before we were having school and home coinciding. As homeschoolers, you figured out how to make all of these pieces fit together. I don't have background with that, as I've 27 years of public school background and some higher education background. But I think back, when I think about slotting those times, and yes, it has a home, I think back to a time of day that I loved when I worked in an elementary school. At the end of the day, we used to have something called Dear Time, drop everything and read. And for one wonderful week in March, the week we celebrated Dr. Seuss's birthday, Read Across America Day, for that wonderful week in March, the teachers got to drop everything and read. We were doing what we had asked the kids to do, but we were taking the time to actually do it that week to celebrate reading. What if we did that every day? If you're working with your kids from home and they have Dear Time or some version of that time, instead of throwing in a load of laundry or washing the dishes that were left in the kitchen sink, what if you dropped everything and read for part of the time? Not only are you taking care of yourself by doing this thing that can refresh you, but you're setting a good example for your kids as well. If it's something like writing, when your kids are working on a writing project for school, you're going to get interrupted. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be small snippets. But can you have a dedicated journal that you pull out? That's mom's writing journal. When the kids are writing, you're writing as well. Again, you expect to get interrupted. But if you can feed it into the schedule, give self-care a home in the schedule, you're much more likely to take that time for yourself. L, let it go. We could do an entire podcast, an entire webinar on the concept of let it go. First of all, let me let you know where I stand on that. Know thyself is somewhere between Marie Kondo and an episode of Hoarders. I'm right, maybe about in the middle of that. I am never going to be as good as Marie Kondo, as letting go of everything, picking it up and deciding if it brings me joy and letting go of everything that way. I'm not wired that way. I am primarily an I need to see it person, but I've got a healthy dose of I love stuff. I'm getting better as I get older at letting go of things. I'm getting better at managing that balance between things coming in and things going out. Which is basically what organization is, managing the flow of things that they come in as they come in, and making sure that the right amount of things are going out as well. But I'm not hardcore about getting rid of things, because we have lots of reasons to hang on to things that matter to us. Sometimes Often it's because they bring us joy, as Marie Kondo, discusses. But other times we just have another sentimental reason that might not be joy, it might be something else, and we hang on to that thing. One of the rules that goes with one of the organizing rules that I can't take credit for, I remember hearing on an HGTV show, is one in, one out. When you bring in something new, you get rid of something old. And it doesn't have to be the exact same thing, but I find it works really well with clothing. When I want to update my wardrobe, which I tend to do a one piece at a time, well, there's no middle ground. It's either one piece at a time or a ridiculous shopping splurge. It's never like three or four things. So I can bring in, if I bring in one new shirt, I can get rid of an old shirt. And that's easy if I'm replacing something that needs to be replaced. The stained old white t-shirt that I've been wearing for 5 summers can go easily when I get a nice new brand new one. Somewhat easily. Sometimes I think I should hang on to it so that when I cook pasta sauce, I can splash it on that shirt, but I digress. But that one in, one out concept also works when it comes to self-care and let it go. We often have a tendency to say yes to a lot of things, but our schedule doesn't continually expand to fill all those things that we say yes to. So maybe sometimes if we say yes to one thing, we say no to another. And that's actually how it works, whether we like it or not, because our schedule doesn't expand. I'm a huge Grey's Anatomy fan. And Shonda Rhimes, creator of Grey's Anatomy, wrote a book called The Year of Yes. Her sister had teased her and told her she never said yes to anything, and she needed to take advantage of all these wonderful opportunities that were arising. And so for a year, she said yes to everything. It was a great experience for her because she went from not saying yes to anything to saying yes to everything. I flipped that because I have no problem saying yes. My problem lies in saying no. So I flipped that a few years back and dubbed it the year of no. And I gave myself permission to say no to things that didn't have meaning for me. In organization, when we let things go, we eliminate the things that we no longer need or that no longer have a place in our lives. We can say the same thing for our expenditures of time. When we say no to something because it doesn't work for us, or it doesn't matter to us, or it's not as important to us as the things that are already on the schedule, we're freeing up time for those things that do matter. And we can more easily take on the new things that we want to take on. This webinar is a great example. We are back to school. I am doing hybrid learning with my students. I'm still working on the learning curve. Probably the absolute last thing I should have done was to say yes to a webinar, but this was something I really wanted to do. This was a yes I wanted to resoundingly say. And so other things were going to have to be set aside for a bit in order to make this happen. We need to give ourselves permission to say no, though, when no is the answer. How often do we say yes because it's what we think we should do? It's what we think we ought to do. Sometimes we have to say yes to the things we think we should do or ought to do. But if that's the reason we're saying yes, we need to examine them and decide who exactly is it who decided that we ought to do this or we should do this. The shoulds can become a tyranny. And I can't take credit for that. That's psychological terminology, this tyranny of the shoulds. They can rule us and leave us saying yes to everything when we really don't have time. And so we can't make time for self-care. Finally, the E in style is easy upkeep. And in organization, in organization, easy upkeep only arises when all of the other pieces have fallen into place. When we have identified our successes and we've taken small steps in the right direction, we've given things homes, we've let go of what doesn't matter anymore, and we now are able to put things in place. We've done the hard work of identifying our styles and deciding what tools work for us, and we've put them into place. And so the upkeep is easy, relatively speaking. Again, it's dynamic. Organizing is a dynamic process that continues to shift over time. How do we get to easy upkeep with self-care? It's a lot harder, but it only happens when we make time. And originally when I'm looking down at the notes that I jotted, and I initially wrote, it happens when we find, and I crossed it out and wrote, make time to take care of ourselves. We can't get to easy upkeep unless we make ourselves a priority. Please understand, I'm not saying we should turn around and become selfish all of the time and say no to everything all of the time, but well-considered no's here and there and putting ourselves on our own schedules are important, not just to us, but to those around us, because they recharge us and they refresh us And when we're all living in close quarters, they make us a lot more fun to be around. And when things are tight, that really matters. In the environment we're living in right now, none of this is easy. It's all extremely challenging. And it's something that we have to work at every day, which is why I come back to the idea of being works in progress. God doesn't expect us to be perfect today, but He does expect us, I think, to be taking steps in the direction that He wants us to go. He wants us to hear His voice and say yes to the things He's calling us to. And if we say yes to too many other things, sometimes we're not able to do that. I love back to school time, although this year's been somewhat different. As somebody who writes about organizing and who loves organizing, I love school supplies. We go to Target every week. Every Friday night, we do our grocery shopping and our miscellaneous shopping at Target. And I have to just go and visit the school supplies because that's who I am. That's part of who I am and how I operate. I visit them partly because I enjoy seeing what's new out there. And most of the time I walk away. I've put myself on a moratorium. I'm not allowed to buy any more notebooks or post-it notes until further notice because I have, I believe, a lifetime supply of notebooks. And I'm actually running through my post-it notes. I might actually be able to lift the moratorium in maybe December or so. So a lot of times I am just looking, but I also look for the time when all that cool new stuff goes on clearance. Right about now, toward the middle to the end of September, when they need to get rid of the things that didn't sell. That's a great time for a mom splurge. Can you find that perfect planner that lets you pencil in time for yourself? Can you find a pretty journal that is just for your time or for the writing time while your kids are writing, you're writing stuff too? And not grocery lists, please. Stuff that matters to you. Can you use this back to school time, this fresh start, this fall time to do something special for yourself, to remind yourself that you matter and you're worthy of a fresh start? That's all I've got. I'm going to set my pretty clipboard. Yes, I love all my color-coded notes to myself. Yes, I love school supplies aside. And I've seen out of the corner of my eye things coming through in the chat. Danielle, thank you so much for managing those. I could not pay attention to those so I didn't lose my train of
Of
thought.
course, of course. Thank you so much, Lisa. I
So,
thoroughly enjoyed that. That was very
Danielle, I
inspiring.
can't hear you. Are you muted?
Oh, let me just make sure. I'm not muted.
Oh, Barb, I see yours at the top. My challenge this
Folks, can you
fall.
hear me? Can you hear me? All
Danielle
right.
has gone mute. That
Hang
I don't
on.
like that.
Hang on. I'm
I'm
going
gonna
to
hit on
pull
Barb's
out.
comment, Danielle, while we figure out the tech, if that's okay.
Are you able to hear me
My
now?
challenge this fall is storing all the dorm stuff my kid won't need since the dorms at his university didn't open. And there are a lot of parents that are in that boat, and I wish I could tell you I had an easy answer for that. We don't, as I said, have a garage, and we were tap dancing. Well, I wish I were tap dancing. That would have been more fun. Around tripping over all the stuff that was in the mud room for a while with my daughter, and that's one of those things where a lot of times you really are simply taking short periods of time and figuring out where it belongs. Because my husband's answer is always put it in her room. Well, there's only so much stuff, only so much space in her room. So finding those spaces, and the trick here too, sorry, I'm interrupting myself. The trick here too is that I'm guessing that in this situation, mom and son have different organizing styles. So finding that sweet spot between the two where we figure out how are we going to put it someplace, what's that location where he's going to remember where the stuff he wanted was, and you're going to remember where the stuff he needs and might not care about, but knows he needs was. So I think that chipping away is huge. Unless you've got a whole Saturday to figuring out where everything goes. I don't know about you guys though. If I do it all at one time, if I set aside a whole Saturday and organize a big space, I have a tendency to forget what wonderful place I put things in when I clean things out. I think I've become so accustomed to taking small steps that I do better that way. I'm more likely to remember where my safe spots were. So.
Okay, Lisa, can you hear me now? I'm hoping you can hear me, Lisa. No. Okay.
I'm looking out and seeing.
Still no. Okay. I'm so sorry, Lisa. I don't know if you all can hear me. I saw that you
Self-care
heard
is
me
important
earlier.
to show our children.
I don't know if you're hearing me now.
Absolutely. I mean, I talked about that with the reading stuff, but that self-care is incredibly important. We need to let them
Okay.
know
I'm
their
going to use the
value.
chat
And
then.
one of the ways that we do that is by showing them that we value ourselves enough to take care of ourselves. So excellent comment. Thank you for that, Erica. See if I can scroll through. See, Danielle, we shouldn't have joked about the tech stuff before we started. That's the problem. I'm going to give another shout out while Danielle is working on tech. At the top of our chat tonight is a free downloadable resource. And for each of the webinars that are happening this month, there will be a free downloadable resource that you can use after the webinar. And it's something, the one that I used tonight, I didn't actually even reference. It goes back to style and it was laid out in that fashion, but it's something that you can use after the fact to remind yourself. Because if you're like me, you walk away from a webinar and you've got all these great ideas and all this stuff that you're going to do. And then about a week in, you lose your motivation or you get tired or you run out of time. So I think it's wonderful that Danielle has put together these resources that you can use after the webinars to remind yourself that this is something that you want to chip away at. I can see the chat. I don't know how you all are doing with volume. I'm scrolling here to see what else I've got here. Greetings, Father Jim. I see you in the chat. Hi, Gabrielle. Thank you very much. Happy to hear. And if anybody's got a question for now, if you can jot it in the chat. And if you don't want me to say your name, just say, put anonymous in parentheses, and I'll say your comment or your question without identifying you. I do see. I have a question for moms who might be struggling with guilt in saying no to things. How can we manage the guilt? Well, I'm going to go back and I'm going to cite, I'm scrolling through I think it was Erica who said how important it is. Self-care is important to show our children. So if we think of it as a lesson that we want our children to learn, that they need to understand how important it is to take care of themselves, then I think that's one way that we let go of the guilt. This is actually a positive aspect of parenting, is that we show our kids by what we do, what it is we want them to do. And I'm looking at the question again because I had another thought when I first read it. Questions for moms might be struggling with guilt in saying no to things. I think a lot of times it does depend on what those things are. Easy to say no to the stuff we don't want to do most of the time, but not always. Sometimes we feel like we should say yes. I think one of the things about this book is I struggled, as some of you have heard me say, I struggled as someone who teaches psychology to find sort of a depth of meaning in this instead of simply it's all about organizing. And it ties directly to using our strengths and using the things that come easily to us. So if we think about saying yes or no to things from a perspective of what our strengths are, and if we look at things, it's easy for me. It took me a long, long time to get good at saying no when someone asks me to make someone a meal and bring it to them. Cooking is not one of my strengths. I feed my family, but now that everyone in the house is an adult and old enough to fend for themselves, we have mom cooks nights where I make food and I make extra, and we have what we call fend for yourself nights. And this is at my own house. So I've recognized that cooking is not a gift for me. It's not a strength for me. So when someone asks me to contribute to something like that, I will happily do that. I'll try and do a gift card of some kind, or a gift basket, a fruit basket, or a bread basket or something from someplace. I do bake, even though I don't always cook, so I might be more likely to go in the direction of that type of a contribution to things. Often when we want to say no to something, it's because it's not an area that we comfortably feel called to doing. And so we want to say no because it feels uncomfortable. So a question maybe to ask ourselves is this an area where I want to grow? That was one of the reasons that tonight's webinar was easy for me to say yes to. This is an area where I want to grow. This is something I want to get more comfortable with and better at doing. And so that's one of the reasons that I wanted to say yes to this. Or is this an area where I recognize it's not a strength, but I've got this other strength over here? And instead of saying yes to this thing here that I really don't want to do because it's not an area of strength and it's not really an area I want to grow, I'm going to do this thing instead. Again, can't take credit for the concept that every yes is a no to something else because we have a limited amount of time and resources. So when we think about the guilt, thinking about where that guilt is coming from, is it coming from, and I'm supposed to do this, I should do this? Um, I am a product of, I was a child of the 70s, and I grew up just on at the other end of Leave It to Beaver and Make Home, or Make the Daddy shows, the 50s housewives. I still have elements, echoes in my head of trying to be Donna Reed. I'm not Donna Reed. I'm nowhere near Donna Reed. I'm never going to be Donna Reed. That's not who I am. But I have other strengths and I have other things that I bring to the table. And those are the things that I can use. But I still have Donna Reed guilt when it comes to something that I'm saying no to, that is one of those things that moms are supposed to be good at. I see another question. How can how can we best model for our kids the idea of being works in progress and being okay with that? One of the books that I read with my freshmen is called Mindset by Carol Dweck, and she talks about the idea of progress, not perfection, or I'm sorry, not progress, not perfection, process, not perfection. That you praise the process with your kids. I can see that you worked really hard at that. I really appreciate the effort that you put into that. And for moms who are good at this, and not all of us are, and dads who are good at this, and not all are, when we let our kids do something, we don't go back and do it over after they've done it because it's not the way we want it to be. I was telling the story, actually, we were talking about perfection in my freshman seminar yesterday, and I was telling the story of the towels in the closet in our bathroom. Um, I'm not a perfect homemaker by any stretch of the imagination, but I like things to look nice. And there are some things that I'm really particular about looking nice. And it drives me crazy when I open the closet where all the towels are in the bathroom, and some of them are folded neatly and some of them are haphazard. So I will often look in there and look, and when someone else has put the towels away, they're not folded right. It would be really easy for me to go in there, and I used to go in there and pull those towels out and fold them the right way and put them back in the closet. Problem is, when I do that, what I do is discourage anyone else in the house from taking the towels out of the dryer and folding them and putting them away. I don't want to do that. I don't want to discourage them from pitching in. So allowing people to pitch in the way that works for them, and certainly if a child is doing something in a way that is dangerous or just creating a bigger mess than we're really ready to deal with, we need to step in and help. But we step in and help and we don't redo. We help kids understand that the thing that's hard today might not be hard in 2 weeks, or in a month. We can say it might not be hard tomorrow, and that's a lovely adage, but the reality is it might be just as hard tomorrow because 24 hours is just often not enough time to fix everything. But to look at the things that our kids are struggling with, and use the words progress to them. You are making progress. Do you remember when last week or last month or last year when you were in third grade, you couldn't do this thing? And now look what you can do. Do you remember when you couldn't do this thing and now you can do this thing? It's a perfect illustration or example of progress, how we progress as we go along. And accepting our own imperfections is also a way that we can encourage our kids to accept their own imperfections. I'm sure that for some people that sounds like let's settle and let's just be blah about everything. And I don't mean it that way at all. We can give things our best effort and we can strive for excellence and we can still end up with a lot of really good, excellent things. Perfection is that thing we're never going to attain in this life. It's flawlessness. It's complete freedom from error. And that's just not going to happen in this life. So we can do the best that we can to create the best outcome that we can. And we can teach our kids that hard work is more important than achieving a perfect outcome, and hope that they'll get closer and closer to that excellent outcome that's important to them. It looks like, I'm just trying to check and see. Nope, I don't see any other questions. And it looks like it might be time to wrap up. I'm seeing a thank you from Danielle, who's joining us from afar. I'm not sure what happened with the technology tonight. I'm sorry you didn't get a break. I was looking forward to having fun with Danielle moderating, but here we are. And sometimes technology is fun and challenging at the same time. Kind of the perfect theme for this evening. You know, we can lay everything out. We can do our best and put out our best laid plans. And sometimes something just does not cooperate. Thank you for joining me this evening. I blog at orgbystyle.blogspot.com, And my email address is l2hess@comcast.net. I love answering questions from people who want to know more about this. I also have a Facebook page, Lisa Lawmaster Hess Writer, and those are places where you can access me if you think of a question beyond our webinar tonight. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Thank you to those who are saying thank you. Clearly, I don't know how to get out of here.